When I was 5, I was out in the garden and this aeroplane flew over and I rushed in and brought my mother out to see it because it must have been the first one I'd seen. I was, so surprised. And my grandma was there and she patted me on the head and she said, and I wonder what other wonderful things you'll see in your lifetime, my dear. My name is Jose Petrick. I was born on the 14th of February 1924, St Valentine's Day, to my parents' joy. I was born in Boscombe Hospital, a suburb of Bournemouth, a big seaside town along the south coast of England. Well, I went to the primary school in a town called Christchurch, which was 5 miles from Bournemouth. Well, our house faced the meadows. It was called Fairfield, and we looked out over the meadows, buttercups and daisies, and a couple of white swans. Grandma lived with us. She seemed terribly old. She was 70, had white hair, sat by the fire all day. Farmer brought about 20 cows in every morning at 8 o'clock, and they just grazed all day, and he'd come back at 4 and collect them, take them back and milk them. We had all the fresh milk, and I don't think it was pasteurised or anything like that. And then this goes down into the sand strip where we had our beach hut. I remember going to say to Mother, Daddy, if you'll only buy us a beach hut, I'll never ask for anything for the whole of my life. When I was 14, we went down to Cornwall for a holiday, had a lovely fortnight going to all the villages and the beaches. The second year we were there was all this talk about Hitler fighting with, it's just rubbish, it's just newspaper talk. And Germany would never dream of invading England. And, we sang Rule Britannia, England was the most wonderful place. And when we got home, my aunt and uncle had been house sitting for us. And Auntie Nesta saw us come and ran out and said, I'm so glad you're home safely. We think there's going to be a war. Mr. Chambers is going to speak to everyone at 11 o'clock Sunday morning. And we think he's going to declare war on Germany.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This country is at war with Germany.
Well, England went straight into war mode. The first thing was all the houses had to be blacked out. They were afraid the Germans' planes would come. And my mother made new curtains for all the house, and the men who were too old to go in the army or were rejected on health grounds were called the Home Guard. They walked round every road and see there were no splits in the curtains, but they weren't drawn properly. What not, there's this banging on the front door. Hey there, you want the Germans to come and bomb us all, do you? Why, look at your curtains. And there was one little split. We never had a split afterwards. It was when I was going to Bournemouth school, and suddenly, I think it was in June, they rang the school and said all the French troops were coming from Dunkirk and they were taking over all the schools in Bournemouth for accommodation, so we wouldn't go to school for a fortnight. They had nothing to do all day, they were all shell-shocked. All our class went down just where the beach near the pier. We were 16 and we all talked to the French soldiers every day. And then after the fortnight we went back to school and we had to go straight into doing our exam because that's when it was. And the French examiner for oral French, when I finished, he said, I cannot understand how all you girls are so fluent in speaking French. I've never heard such fluency in my life. And we all had merits. And then when I was 18, I started my nursing training at Boscombe Hospital. And got sinusitis, which was now just enough that you have antibiotics, but all the antibiotics went to the troops and the civilians weren't allowed any. And then at the end of the year, when we took our pre-lit exam, I couldn't do it because I had temperature 104. So I went into the Land Army. I then went back to Portsmouth. I had to start again, the 4-year training. The hospital had been bombed badly before I went there. They'd taken over a big house in the hills, and I was on the women's ward. There was all this talk about when D-Day will be. All the soldiers buzzing around in hi, beautiful, what you doing tonight, beautiful, and off they go. And then I went home for my days off, and there were no soldiers, nobody around. Town was so quiet. My mother said, well, we think D-Day's going to be any day. Oh, she said, oh, it's going to be terrible.
In England, General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his deputy commanders chart the liberation of a lost continent, plan when and where the mighty armies of the United Nations will strike. Today, northern France is that battleground.
So I went back on the train, and next night, when I went on the ward in the morning, it was silent. All the beds were made up. There was nobody, no sister, no other nurses. I was the only one there. There was this huge table with cupboards underneath, but this was piled high with cotton wool swabs. And then 10 o'clock I went to the diner to a cup of tea.
Another of the great decisive battles of world history has been joined. This is the day for which free people long have waited. This is D-Day.
And when I went back at 10:30 that morning, there were these 4, they were all lying against the white pillows, and they were all bandaged, cotton bandaged, the Smith for the eye, Smith for the nose, Smith for the mouth, and their arms and fingers, all separate bandages and arms. And I turned around, and through the windows, I could see this cavalcade of ambulances slowly crawling up bumper to bumper, and khaki signs with the Red Cross. And they came round and stopped, and all these orderlies appeared, and they were putting these patients. Suddenly all these strange doctors arrived, nurses, they were giving them drips. They had to give them saline, they couldn't give them blood, there wasn't time to check their blood. So I was going past a lieutenant's bed, his leg up in extension. He said, what you doing tonight, nurse? And I said, first of all, I'm going to ring my mother in Bournemouth and see how she's going. He said, you know the Bourne Hotel? I said, of course I do. And he said, when I ring his mother, Dad went down in the submarine, they all drowned, and I'm all she's got. So all the way I was thinking, what shall I say? What shall I say? No, I won't introduce myself. Well, as soon as she asks, I'll just say, good news, good news, good news. So this phone rang, and there's a little voice, hello. I said, good news, good news. Oh, she said. So I said, your son's all right. He's got a broken leg. He's in hospital, not far away, but he's very well and happy. And he asked me to ring you and tell you he's all right. Oh, of course, all she could say was thank you.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday, the 8th of May.
I was working in the outpatients, and the surgeon was busy. He was a very tall, slim man. He never spoke, and he was very busy cutting this dead skin off.
But in the interest of saving lives, the ceasefire began yesterday to be sounded along all the fronts.
Door burst opening, comes sister. Right, the war's over, the war's over. The surgeon had this dead skin. Hooray, hooray, Peter will be home. Peter was this fighter pilot. That night I think we all went to town and just danced. Oh, the church bells rang. The church bells were delayed to ring. It was just so exciting. No more bombing, no. When I was a kid, I won this book at school called The Countries of the British Commonwealth. And the first country was Australia, because those days they only had black and white pictures. And there was this tall, slim man dressed in dark clothes on this huge black horse, and he was surrounded by what looked to me hundreds of black cows. And the caption was, one man and his wife might live 100 miles from the nearest town and 100 miles to the nearest neighbour. And I thought, well, how could one man's wife milk all these cows twice a day, and what did they do with the milk? My father said, ask a school teacher. So I asked the school teacher, I don't know, dear, you'd better go and find out, hadn't you? And so then when I was doing midwifery, the girl I was showing brought out all these pamphlets of Australia. Oh, it looked so lovely, the pieces we'd learned about in geography. This is the ship I came out on. We got on the liner at Southampton. A fellow met us from the ship in Sydney, and then the matron was English. I said, oh, I'm so glad you two girls come. I'll have an all English staff. Balmain in those days was just a shabby old filthy town, and there was rubbish in the road. And I said to her, we might as well stay in London if we're going to have an all English staff. Why are we here? We'll come out here to see the world. We got jobs at the Repat Hospital. When we were at Concord, everyone said how nice Tasmania was. So we went to Hobart, a hospital there. Then I was working in Adelaide. I was at the CSI, or I was a store clerk. I wanted to see a cattle station before I went home. And there was this ad in the paper for a companion helper doing the data. So I looked on the map, didn't really want to go there, but I thought, well, it's a step. You know, I thought it over, and I think I'd be just too lonely. So I've got all about it. And a month later, I had a letter from the sister on the other station out of Alice Springs. And the sister had a little girl of 7 and a little boy of 5. I'd told this lady that I only wanted to jump for 2 or 3 months, you know, trying to go around the world, ha ha. So the plane took 6 hours in those days. And I had to go out to Parafield. I had to be there by 5, pouring with rain. It rained every day in Adelaide. And I'd taken my winter coat naturally from England, fur gloves, stocking shoes, and velvet corduroy dress. How when we get off the plane at Alice Springs at midday, there the women in sundresses and sandals, and the men all wore shorts and shirts. Couldn't believe it. There was no one from TAA at all. There was nothing there, nothing. No sign saying airport or Alice Springs 7 miles. There were only 3 other women on the plane. So when we got off the plane, there were 3 men waiting. One lady said, we can't leave you here. And I said, well, where are you going to take me? And she said, well, where are you going? And I said, well, to a cattle station 300 miles away. Oh, we couldn't go there, come on, darling. So she and darling went off. And the little voice said, someone will come, someone will come. There was only a rock to sit on, the flight was terrible. So I took my coat off and it was so hot because my dress had 3/4 sleeves. And anyway, then this dust came down and funny 4-wheel drive to exit American. He said, I'm the taxi driver. Matt couldn't come because he'd gone to the railway station to get your trunk. And we got to town and Mac comes round with the truck. Rose got in the back. there was little boy Cammy, who was I was teach, and little boy Jock, age 3. And little boy Jock will be 80 tomorrow, and he's invited me to his birthday party. And I sat in the front with Heather. We went out of town, Michelin for the first 40 miles, and then we'll turn off. So we go along this road. That's seen a soul, not a soul, not a horse, not a cow, supposed to be cattle country, nothing. There was this house, but no sign of life there. What are they busy doing? There was nothing, you couldn't see a vehicle or anything. Anyway, then we had 100 miles or more to go along just a dirt road. And they turned off when nothing was marked and didn't say where it is. It's just the middle of nowhere. And then we go through a fence, you know, a big wooden gate. Went on and on and on and on. I tried to make conversation, you know, because we went over all these dry creeks and river beds that was dry as a bone. And I said, why don't you have bridges over all these? Oh, don't know. so we came to a little house on the hill. And this lady who'd introduced me, what a lovely garden Rose had. And I was looking forward to, my mother had, you know, rose arbour over the front gate, rhododendrons and roses and everything. There was nothing, no fence around the house. And all the papers we'd had about Australia, how modern and up to date. We went in the kitchen, they had wood stove. I thought, this is medieval England, a big log fire burning a bucket of wood. I can't believe it. Rose had told me in my letter I must bring a torch and spare batteries, because when Mac turned the generator off, suddenly everything's black and silent. The end of the world's come. It's so quiet, everything's pitch dark. I just couldn't believe it. I turned my little torch on, pulled the curtains, and they come down on me. They clattered out. I go to pick them up and realise the curtain rod is an Aboriginal spear. At one end is all blood red. Oh God. There was a little room outside. The Aboriginal women had cut all these rushes and sewed them together. They were walls and made a cement floor, and this was a schoolroom. 10 o'clock we stopped at the school there, and that was on a little radio, you know, two-way radio. School there had just started, but there was only one teacher, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for about a quarter hour. The teacher would talk to all the grades, you know, on nature or history or geography. Very different from now. First teacher was a chap called Mr. Kissel in Hartley Street School, was a primary school in the town, and he just had the end of a passage with a chair there and a table and this little flying dog that sat up on the wall, and he'd talk to all the children, and when he'd finished the story they'd all call back and thank you very much, Mr. Kissel. I taught the little boy grade 1. First, he had to do a picture of a diary, so I said to his mother, whatever shall we do? She said, oh, just draw a hill like that, and then people, you just draw round circles, stick body, stick legs. Then I was doing all these brown streaks so straight and sent it off, and weeks later it came back. Teacher says, grass is green, dear. Well, I wasn't going to tell her after all the hours she's never seen green grass. So, teacher says that's a beautiful picture. You listen to the 8 o'clock first of all the medicals, but of course hundreds of people in the network, they all heard the medical, what someone's troubles were. Everyone had a big flying doctor medical case with all the medicines and bottles that were all numbered. And so the doctor said, take 2 teaspoons, bottle number 6 or something like that. It was a week before I was due to leave, and we went out and I had a cup of tea in the kitchen, and the children's father came in with this tall, dark, handsome fellow, and I was introduced to Martin Petrick, who was the neighbour. As we shook hands, his voice said, "This is the man you're going to marry, this is the man you're going to marry." So anyway, the next morning we were doing school, and the children's mother came in and said, Martin's sister just called her on the two-way radio and said they'd come over and pick me up to go over to their place for the weekend. So, oh well. Following Friday, I had to go to town. It was the end of the school term. I went to the TAA. I thought I'll go to Darwin, except if I can get a job at the hospital. And I was walking out of TAA. I used to walk in with Martin Petrick. He said, "Whatever you're doing here?" And I said, "Oh, well, I thought I might go to Darwin." But he said, "Well, I thought you were here next year." I said, "No, I was only 3 months." "Well, why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Well, you didn't ask me." So he said, "Well, why didn't you come back to Mad Swan with me and have Christmas and then go to Darwin afterwards?" So on Christmas Day, he asked me to marry him, and it just seems like everything was in order, So I agreed. I only came for 4 months. I just wanted to see a cattle station, and I wanted to go around and see more of Australia and the world. And I married the boy next door. There was only one church in Alice, and that was the Church of England, very high church. There was this organisation called the Australian Inland Mission that John Flynn was with, and he had all these AIM ministers going around, and they stopped at cattle stations. And so we had a man called Skipper Partridge who married us, and Kurt Johansson, Martin's uncle, had a nice house in Alice Springs, and we could get married on his veranda. So I had no one to come, of course, but they had about 40 relations and friends coming. There was no delicatessen or anything. And on his way in, Kurt shot 4 turkeys and cooked them the next day in the copper.
My dear Jessie, no doubt you will be surprised to see I am still in Alice Springs, but was married in May, and I am now living happily ever afterwards.
Oh, that's Martin and me on our honeymoon. We were in the mustering camp. Very romantic.
So I am now one of the Outback pioneers. We bought a caravan and so reside in the garden. It is 14 by 8 feet with a kitchenette divided off at one end and 4 foot long.
My father-in-law drove in one day and said, "Neutral Junction's for sale and it's empty and no cattle on it, and we'll buy it." And Martin could go as manager. So of course Martin was thrilled to bits. This is my first driving lesson on Mad Swan in the Jeep. It looks so English, doesn't it? Long skirt and petticoats.
I drove the Jeep about 10 miles all by myself one day as Martin was driving another vehicle. I only flattened one little gum tree, but luckily it sprung up again and is still living. All the cattle and sheep cleared off the road as I thundered madly along, and even the rabbits ran for their lives.
Yes, I had 2 children. She was born in the Alice Springs Hospital, and so was Grant. This was the John Flynn Church, and this is Suzette, when she was christened.
On Sunday, we saw a strange sight. At least it was strange to me. A string of 3 camels walking across the paddock with a couple of blackfellows leading them, one carrying an armful of spears and the other holding back a couple of dogs. They had their worldly possessions on the camels, but looked to me like an array of small shell tins, and a fine assortment of much-used billy cans. I got a snap of the procession, so hope it turns out well. Mount Swan Station, Northern Territory, October 1952.
I think in 1964, if there was a trained nurse living on the station, or if they employed one, you had more than 50 Aboriginals. Well, before I left, there were 100. Then you could build a room had to be separate from the homes with running water, and they'd come up and inspect it. And then they'd pay the nurse to work part-time, and then they'd equip it. Anyone who was sick or cut their hand, or they come on, and it worked very well. Apart from the Aboriginal people, there were 4 families living in Neutral Junction with the husbands and wives and the children. That made about an extra 20. Of course, we had staff as well, ran a road trade business for cattle. Barrack Creek, there was a telegraph station. Also, the Barrack Creek Hotel had a staff of about 6 people usually, so they'd all come to me if there was any sickness. Well, after dark, there were no street lights, so it was all pitch dark, and the cattle would like to stand on the road because the bitumen was warmer at night time than the grass. Your headlights would pick up their eyes, but if they weren't facing you, well, you wouldn't see them because they were all dark cattle, and there were most terrible accidents. And of course there was no one to help them. Then if someone went by, they'd stop at Barrack Creek Postal to tell the people there or wake them up, and then they'd ring me. There was no doctor. I had to go and see the accident, see if it was bad enough, for an ambulance. But because I was only part-time, my 2 little children, I couldn't stay over, at night time. If they needed hospital, they needed hospital. I took a refresher shorthand typing class, and this advert came in the Advocate, a cadet journalist for 2-year training wanted the Advocate. I was 50, so when I walked in, first thing the editor said, "Did you not know we advertised for a junior?" A month later, I think, or a fortnight later, going to ring me if still interested in job. So I went down and he said, "The juniors can't type and spell." The history of Alice Springs through street names and landmarks. There were over 600 names in it. The Petricks had a house, street called Renner Street, R-E-N-N-E-R. And in the book, he was the doctor for the telegraph line. He had the longest surgery in the world, from Port Augusta up to the Catherine River. Oh, so excited. I had this big envelope saying, just to me, strictly confidential, private. I thought, oh, it must be a strict fine. I'd gone through the yellow lights, I thought it was a strict fine. And then when I opened it, it was saying I'd been nominated for the OAM for my historic, would I accept it? So I said, of course I would. This is the administrator pinning my badge on. This is at Madigan's restaurant. That's the 5th edition of that book. And I also wrote a book about the lady who built a pipeline at Hermansburg. And then the next day, I had an identical envelope. I thought, this is the fight. And when I was saying I'd been nominated to carry the torch in Alice Springs. So I was over the moon. I thought, oh, what an honour. When they gave us the torches, they said there was a little loop at the bottom. And they said, when you light your torch, you must hold that down. but they didn't say you must hold it all the time you're running, because that was a little gas cylinder, so everyone let it out, and then you had to wait until the man with the little lamp came up and could relight it. Went all around Ayers Rock, which is 5 miles, so everyone let it out there. I was supposed to start running here at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We got here at 4:30, and it didn't come until 7 o'clock. It was so cold. I carried it from the gate. And just after he started, this Aboriginal lady came running out of the bush, and she gave me this big bunch of native flowers, and we all had a well-behaved school child as our escort. And I had this nice young boy, about 40, so I gave him the flowers to hold, because I couldn't carry it all. It was pitch dark, and they floodlit the Hevingtree Gap. It looked beautiful, all the gum branches, silhouetted, and the rock was also glistening with the different sparkles in it.
She stepped off the boat from Bournemouth town, young Josie with dreams in her eyes. A working holiday took her far and wide beneath the southern skies. But she stayed on, oh she stayed on, in the heart of the red dust land. Married the boy next door at dawn, did a life on neutral Junction sand. Governess at McDonald down station, a few hundred clicks from Alice town. Planned just 2 months beneath the sun, but her heart would never settle down. She stayed on, oh she stayed on, in the heart of the red dust lane. Married the boy next door at dawn, built a life on neutral Junction sand.